Hi, I'm James Fleck, and welcome to another episode of Corporate Courage. Sometimes people ask me, is there one factor that's actually more important than all the others in assessing a great CEO? And the answer is yes. And that thing is resiliency. Resiliency can get you through a lot. It can get you through bad market conditions, a flawed business model, and even a team that's not prepared and performing very well. So today on Corporate Courage, I'd like to talk about resiliency. I'm a former public company CEO and GE executive, and I've been coaching CEOs and their teams for well over a decade now. And as much as every client is unique and every challenge that they face is also unique, there are some universal truths in my work. And one of these truths is that resiliency is at the apex of traits in any great leader or team. This truth is often expressed in pearls of wisdom that we've heard at one point or another. Pearls like Margaret Atwood, who wrote, "Don't let the bastards grind you down." Or Vince Lombardi's quote that it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get up. Or one of my personal heroes, Joseph Campbell, who said, "It's by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. When you stumble, there lies your treasure." And if none of these quotes are working for you, my LinkedIn feed recently featured a short anecdote by New Zealander Russell Coutts, one of the most accomplished sailors in the world, who's collaborated with Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, on a few different sailing projects through the years. Russell wrote, "When I was in the early days of working with Larry Ellison, I actually asked him one time, 'What's the secret to success in business?' He started by giving a long-winded answer, and I think he saw my eyes glaze over. I probably wasn't following as closely as I should have. And he actually stopped and said, 'You know what the most important thing is? Not giving up.'" Now, some leadership traits, such as emotional intelligence, are quite challenging to develop in a leader, as they tend to be hardwired in our brains from a young age. The great news is that anybody, and certainly any motivated leader, can absolutely develop their own resiliency. All it takes is courage and hard work. I've come up with my own framework that works quite well in helping leaders become resilient, and it's comprised of three concepts: knowing yourself, orienting yourself around a structure, and then surrounding yourself with a supportive ecosystem. You can't always set yourself up with all of these elements, but the more that you do, the more resilient you can become. Let's get started with know yourself, which is a deceivingly simple sounding concept. Frankly, when people ask me to explain the essence of executive coaching, this is where I go. Our job as coaches is to work with clients to develop practical insight into their motivators, triggers, and stressors, and then to figure out how our clients can modify specific behaviors based on this knowledge. You never can really change who you are, but you can change how you behave. You may have quite a good handle on what you believe to be your own motivators, triggers, and stressors, but it's a great idea for all of us to look around for a second opinion. If you have a spouse or a partner, this might be a great place to start. Interestingly, siblings can also be a good source of insight because our brothers and sisters have known us for almost our entire lives, and they can often be much more objective than parents. And beyond asking people for their opinions, this is where some kind of behavioral assessment might be helpful. Now, I'm not an unconditional fan of psychological assessments because I've seen how horribly they can be misused, but that's a topic for another day. If you are interested in this topic, check out my article, Executive Assessment, A Cautionary Tale, which is on the website. Having said all this, I'm a fan of the Berkman method, which has been used for many years to assess executives and their teams. It's also quite useful in couples counseling, as well as for young people thinking through career choices. I like Berkman because it is rigorously non-judgmental, meaning that it is truly a self-awareness tool, and there are no right answers. It's also very effective at identifying behaviors that a person exhibits under significant stress. And for the purpose of developing self-awareness in order to build resiliency, this understanding of stress behavior is key. Like most products in the consulting world, the Berkman model can be distilled into a 4-block matrix. And here I've shown the 4-block with my own top-line descriptions of the different types of stress behavior. The upper right green quadrant represents behavior which can become negatively persuasive or maybe even a little bullying under stress. The upper left red quadrant represents impulsive or impatient behavior under stress. The bottom left yellow quadrant represents overly rigid black and white thinking under stress. And the bottom right blue quadrant represents a withdrawn and avoidant behavior under stress. Let's just pause for a moment. Do you have an initial sense of which stress behavior might be most applicable to you? Again, this is a great question to ask a spouse, sibling, or close friend. And please listen to their perspective, because it's very common for people to experience a blind spot around their own stress behavior. Now, how does this self-awareness play out in terms of building resilience? I'll start with a personal example. I reside way down in the blue quadrant under stress, and I did sort of know this about myself long before I answered a Berkman questionnaire. For me, this plays out as ruminating and being completely lost in my head while I'm trying to address a difficult situation. But the thing is, while I'm doing all this thinking to try to solve a problem, I'm not very good at reaching out, letting people know what I'm thinking about, or trying to engage other people into solving the problem with me. Other people perceive my behavior as non-communicative and avoidant. Now, as I've gotten to know myself, I see this pattern coming at me like a freight train when the temperature starts to rise. Using this self-awareness, I have pushed myself to alter my behavior under stress. I force myself to reach out, to provide people with status updates, and to seek advice. I force myself to push forward where I can, even if some elements of a plan are still fuzzy. And here's the thing, the more I force myself to do these things, the better I feel and the more effective I become. These positive feelings make me resilient in the face of challenges. And I'll give one other example. A few founders who I work with test way up in the red quadrant under stress. They're wired to jump on a problem as soon as it arises, even if they're missing key information. Often these clients will use me as a sounding board to force them to slow down, ensuring they have all the facts, and then building coalitions and direction before forging ahead with a decision. They tell me that this deliberative exercise to slow down and be a little more reflective has helped them to feel more grounded, resilient, in the face of tough challenges. So I think that establishes the central role of knowing yourself in building resilience. And I'd like to now move on to the second concept in the framework, orienting yourself around a structure. This is another idea that I'm sure you've all come across in one way or another. A really straightforward example would be when you establish your walkaway price in a transaction before you enter the heat of negotiation. Taking the time to plan, analyze, and internalize your walkaway can make you calm and resilient in a stressful and challenging negotiation, as long as you stick to it. Now expand the idea of a walkaway price to be any other operating principle or strategy that's critical to your organization, and you can start to see what I mean by the structure that you can orient yourself around. Purpose, vision, and strategy are all examples of really helpful structures. If your organization has a well-articulated purpose, or if you have a clear vision, or if you have the confidence in the merits of your strategy, it can give you the strength to move mountains in challenging situations. I have a client who founded his company many years ago, and he knows everything imaginable about his market, technology, and competitors. He knows where he can compete and win, and where he can't. A few years ago, one of his principal investors pushed him to grow faster, and they became very insistent that my client's company enter some market segments that he felt were not winnable. They stacked the board against him, demoted him, and in the end tried to force him out of the company. But my client's unwavering commitment to his strategy gave him the wherewithal, the resilience, to continue to make the case for his more focused segment strategy. He methodically analyzed every failed attempt to enter into these unsuitable segments, and he worked the board director by director to help them understand his perspective. Fast forward to this year, admittedly with the help of some legal maneuvering and improved governance at the board, and my client is back in charge and the company is starting to get back on track. Through all of this multi-year drama, my client never gave up. He never conceded his strategy. He was resilient. Now I imagine some of you are thinking, well, wait a minute. Could it be that In the case of this client, he was actually being stubborn and resistant to change, and not just resilient. And yes, this is an important reality check. Resiliency doesn't mean being mindlessly rigid and never compromising. In fact, sometimes conceding a tactical failure and regrouping to win the next battle is the essence of resiliency. Remember the Joseph Campbell quote? "When you stumble, there lies your treasure." It can be incredibly tough to self-monitor whether you are being resilient or just blindingly stubborn. And this leads us to the third and final concept in the framework, surrounding yourself with a supportive ecosystem. Having people who you trust, who are supportive, and whose judgment is sound is a powerful element in building resiliency. In the case of the client who fought his board on segment strategy, it was critical for him to have a supportive community, including me as his coach, to reaffirm or call BS on his unwavering commitment to his strategy, to test, but also to encourage and to allow him to vent. This is one of the primary functions of a peer group, such as YPO or any other number of similar groups, and I always encourage my CEO clients to find some kind of peer community. In fact, in my own coaching career, I've always tried to be part of a peer supervision group, where I can bring my most vexing challenges for perspectives, ideas, and support, and to provide the same back to my peers. And it goes without saying that having a healthy community of friends and family can also be extremely helpful in building this resiliency. So, those are the three elements in the framework. Know yourself, orient yourself around a structure, and then surround yourself with a supportive ecosystem. I'd like to also spend a few minutes addressing best practices in building resiliency, as well as leaving you with an incredibly inspirational example. One of my lifetime passions is aviation. For me, aviation exemplifies vision, innovation, courage, and yes, resiliency. Resiliency in the sense that aviation has evolved the most robust safety and quality systems ever known, addressing both technology as well as human factors. So what does aviation have to teach us as business leaders? The key learnings are the power of structure, as well as cockpit human resource management, CRM, which speaks to ecosystem or community. Pilots are continuously guided by checklists. Strict adherence to these checklists keeps actions from being missed during routine operations. But more importantly, they keep the crew calm and on task during the very high stress scenarios that can unfold in seconds as an aircraft hurtles through the sky. Structure maintains calm. Calm allows pilots to stay focused, and this calm focus builds a resiliency in the face of real-life dangers. And onto this structure, pilot training in recent decades has emphasized CRM, meaning that pilots are trained to support each other, recognize stress triggers, and communicate effectively when time is of the essence. It's really brilliant stuff, and it needs to be applied to other professions and to business in general. Now, as a final point, I'd like to acknowledge the inspirational 1946 book, Man's Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl. Frankl was a psychoanalyst who survived Nazi concentration camps during World War II. He wrote about how he, and others who successfully endured the unspeakably cruel and evil conditions, survived. The ultimate example of human resilience. He wrote about the central importance of finding a purpose in completing everyday tasks, in caring for others, and facing suffering and cruelty with dignity. I keep a copy of Man's Search for Meaning on the shelf next to my desk. Whenever I'm feeling a little spent, all I need to do is glance at the spine of this book and remember Frankl's story, and all of my challenges are immediately put into perspective. Thanks for watching and listening. And if you remember one word from today's episode, that word is obviously resiliency. I'll see you next time on Corporate Courage.